With a foreclosure notice clutched in her trembling hands and a demolition contract that barely covered her family's crushing medical debt, Elena Vasquez unknowingly swung her sledgehammer into a wall that would expose one of World War II's most devastating art heists and transform her desperate struggle for survival into a battle against forces that had spent 8 decades keeping their wartime secrets buried. For behind the crumbling plaster of the old Rothschild estate lay masterpieces stolen by Nazi officers, paintings worth over $110 million that powerful collectors and institutions had long presumed lost to history forever. Before we dive deeper into this incredible discovery, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story captivates you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we have something truly extraordinary waiting for you. The October rain hammered against the windshield of Elena Vasquez's weathered Ford pickup as she navigated the serpentine roads of Crescent Ridge, one of Connecticut's most exclusive enclaves, where century-old estates commanded prices that exceeded her lifetime earnings. At 38, with paint-stained work clothes and shoulders that ached from years of restoration labor, Elena felt like an outsider in this realm of pristine gardens and towering wrought-iron gates. She hadn't intended to become a demolition contractor. For 12 years, Elena had built her reputation as a master craftsperson, specializing in historic preservation and architectural restoration. Her hands could coax life back into deteriorating Victorian mansions and transform crumbling colonial homes into architectural showpieces. But economic reality had a brutal way of rewriting life plans with merciless precision. 8 months ago, her 10-year-old son Diego had been diagnosed with a rare neurological condition requiring experimental treatments unavailable through their modest insurance plan. The medical expenses had accumulated faster than Elena's income could match, and now Fairfield County Bank was threatening foreclosure on their small craftsman cottage, the same home where she'd taught Diego woodworking basics in the garage workshop, where 4 generations of the Vasquez family had built their American dreams. The irony cut deep. A woman who restored homes for others was about to lose the one place her family had ever truly belonged. Another weight on shoulders already bent from carrying too much, she whispered, echoing her mother's concerned words from their morning phone call. Elena's wife, Maria, worked nights as an emergency room physician, but even their combined professional incomes couldn't outpace Diego's treatment costs. The specialists, the medications, the monthly trips to Boston Children's Hospital, it all added up to an impossible equation. The Rothschild mansion emerged from the gray Connecticut mist like a Gothic revival monument to forgotten wealth. Constructed in the 1920s during the Jazz Age's prosperity, the massive stone structure had been abandoned for over 2 decades, its once magnificent facade now shrouded in creeping ivy and decay. Elaborate carved stonework showed water damage, and several arched windows were sealed with weathered plywood that had begun to warp and split. Elena parked beside a temporary construction trailer and stepped into the steady drizzle. The property developer, a sharp-eyed businesswoman named Victoria Sterling, had been unambiguous about expectations: complete demolition within 4 weeks, salvage anything marketable for resale, and prepare the 12-acre site for luxury residential development. The compensation was substantial, $22,000 plus percentage of salvaged materials, but the work would be grueling. 1 person, 4 weeks, and a mansion that had stood as a testament to old-world craftsmanship for nearly a century. The main entrance, featuring massive oak doors with intricate bronze hardware, resisted briefly before yielding to Elena's experienced shoulder. The interior atmosphere struck her immediately. Decades of abandonment had created layers of scent, dust particles dancing in weak light, persistent dampness, forgotten time, and something else that seemed familiar yet elusive. Perhaps expensive tobacco, or the lingering essence of old wealth and privilege. Her industrial flashlight illuminated a breathtaking grand foyer with a sweeping marble staircase, its ornate balustrade carved from what appeared to be imported Italian stone. Even in advanced decay, the architectural excellence was undeniable. Hand-painted ceiling frescoes, though faded and water-stained, revealed the quality that came only with unlimited budgets and European artisans. The parquet floors, warped in places from decades of moisture damage, displayed the intricate patterns that marked genuine craftsmanship. Should have been designated a historic landmark instead of scheduled for demolition, Elena murmured, running her calloused palm along the smooth marble banister. But preservation sentiments didn't cover medical bills or prevent home foreclosures. According to Sterling's historical briefing, the estate had belonged to the Rothschild family until the early 1940s. Abraham Rothschild had been a prominent European art dealer who immigrated to America in 1939, purchasing this Connecticut property as sanctuary from the escalating persecution of Jewish families throughout Nazi-occupied Europe. The family had maintained the estate until Abraham's unexpected death in 1940, after which the property had cycled through multiple owners before falling into prolonged neglect and eventual abandonment. Elena began her systematic assessment, photographing each room with professional thoroughness, noting architectural elements worth salvaging, and marking load-bearing walls that would require specialized equipment during demolition. The mansion exceeded expectations: servants' quarters with period fixtures, a wood-paneled library featuring floor-to-ceiling built-in shelving, formal dining and drawing rooms with original crystal chandeliers, and a kitchen that hadn't been modernized since the Eisenhower administration. It was in what had clearly served as Abraham's private study that Elena first detected something architecturally inconsistent. The room's interior dimensions felt disproportionate, as if the usable space were significantly smaller than the exterior wall measurements suggested. She measured methodically, confirming her professional instincts. Approximately 10 feet of unaccounted space existed behind the study's rear wall. Concealed rooms weren't unusual in estates from this era, particularly those constructed by wealthy families who valued security, privacy, or discretion. Throughout her restoration career, Elena had discovered Prohibition-era liquor storage, Depression-era safe rooms, and even Cold War bomb shelters. This was most likely a vault or private storage area that had been permanently sealed and subsequently forgotten over the decades. Professional curiosity overcame her exhaustion from the day's initial survey. If valuable architectural salvage lay hidden behind that wall, period fixtures, antique hardware, vintage furniture, or even original artwork, it could dramatically increase her earnings from this project. Every additional dollar mattered desperately when Diego's next round of treatments was scheduled in 10 days. Elena retrieved her heavy-duty sledgehammer from the truck, along with a reciprocating saw and professional pry bar set. The wall appeared to be standard horsehair plaster applied over wooden lath, probably added sometime after the mansion's original construction. Removing it would be straightforward demolition work, though inevitably messy and labor-intensive. She began with careful exploratory holes, breaking through the plaster to verify that empty space indeed existed behind. Her powerful LED flashlight revealed not a compact closet or basic safe room, but what appeared to be a substantial chamber with professionally finished interior walls. Pulse quickening with anticipation and possibility, Elena began systematically removing larger sections of the false wall structure. As the opening expanded sufficiently for entry, her flashlight beam illuminated something that made her freeze mid-swing, Sledgehammer suspended in disbelief. Hanging on the far wall of the hidden chamber was a painting, not a family portrait or decorative reproduction, but something that even her non-expert eye immediately recognized as museum-quality artwork. The brushwork technique, the aged canvas texture, the elaborate gilded frame, all indicated serious artistic and financial value. Stepping carefully through the opening she'd created, Elena found herself inside a climate-controlled chamber, measuring approximately 15 feet by 20 feet. And the revelation wasn't limited to a single painting. The walls displayed canvases of varying sizes, each meticulously hung and protected by what appeared to be professional museum-grade preservation equipment. Small brass placards beneath each piece bore handwritten identification labels in what looked like German script mixed with English notations. Elena counted with growing amazement 23 paintings, 4 sculptures, and several smaller decorative objects displayed on custom pedestals. Her restoration experience with high-end estates had exposed her to enough valuable artwork to recognize exceptional quality, and this collection transcended typical wealthy homeowner acquisitions. These pieces possessed the presence and technical mastery that belonged in major museums or elite private collections worth millions. One painting commanded immediate attention, a portrait of an elegant Renaissance noblewoman in elaborate period clothing, her direct gaze somehow both inviting and mysteriously distant. The technical execution was extraordinary, with every fabric fold and jewelry detail rendered with photographic precision. The identification placard read Portrait of Bianca Sforza, Workshop of Leonardo da Vinci,
c. 1496.
Elena felt her legs weaken as the implications registered. She didn't need formal art education to understand what she was reading. Authentic, any work connected to Leonardo's workshop would be valued in tens of millions, possibly approaching 9 figures for pieces of exceptional provenance and condition. Another canvas captured her attention, a vibrant landscape that seemed to pulse with internal luminosity and movement. The placard identified it as the Mulberry Tree, Vincent van Gogh, 1880. Elena had encountered Van Gogh reproductions in countless settings throughout her career, but observing what might be an authentic original was an entirely different sensory experience. The paint appeared to have dimensional depth and kinetic energy that no reproduction could authentically capture. As she moved through the chamber with increasing amazement, each new discovery proved more staggering than the previous. Works attributed to Pablo Picasso, Henri Matisse, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Paul Cézanne, Claude Monet, names she recognized even with her limited formal artistic knowledge. If these attributions were legitimate, she was examining a collection worth more money than most nations' annual budgets. But immediate questions flooded her analytical mind. Why conceal these masterpieces? If Abraham Rothschild had been a legitimate art dealer with proper acquisition documentation, why hide his collection behind a false wall? And why had they remained undiscovered for over 20 years since the mansion's abandonment? Elena photographed everything comprehensively with her smartphone, though the chamber's subdued lighting made detailed documentation challenging. Her hands trembled as she captured image after image, experiencing equal measures of excitement and terror at the magnitude of her accidental discovery. A yellowed envelope, tucked behind one of the smaller gilded frames, caught her attention. Carefully extracting it, she found what appeared to be a handwritten letter dated November 1943, composed in flowing cursive. "My dearest colleague Heinrich, the precious works you entrusted to my protection remain safely concealed, as promised. I fear my declining health will not permit me to witness the conclusion of this devastating war, but I have made comprehensive arrangements for their continued security. These masterpieces must be returned to their rightful families when civilized society emerges from this darkness. The detailed documentation you provided, confirming Nazi theft, matches numerous pieces in my safekeeping. I pray that justice will eventually triumph, and these cultural treasures will find their way home to those from whom they were so brutally stolen. May God preserve us all until that blessed day." Rothschild. Elena reread the letter multiple times, its historical implications slowly crystallizing in her understanding. These weren't simply valuable paintings hidden for routine safekeeping. They were potentially stolen masterpieces, looted during World War II, and concealed by someone who intended their eventual return to legitimate owners. Abraham Rothschild hadn't been protecting his personal collection. He'd been serving as a guardian for artwork stolen by Nazi forces, preserving it safely until it could be restored to families, museums, and collectors from whom it had been violently seized. The overwhelming weight of the discovery pressed down on her shoulders. This transcended salvage value or personal financial considerations. These paintings might represent some of the world's most significant lost cultural heritage, artwork stolen from Jewish families, prestigious museums, and private collectors during the Holocaust's systematic cultural destruction. Each piece potentially had descendants somewhere still searching for lost family heirlooms, still mourning treasures torn away during history's darkest chapter. Elena sank into a dust-covered period chair, staring at the extraordinary collection surrounding her on all sides. 36 hours ago, her primary concern had been earning sufficient income to maintain her house payments and cover Diego's medical expenses. Now she had become the inadvertent custodian of what might represent one of the most significant art discoveries in modern history, a collection potentially valued over $100 million, but which belonged to people she'd never met. Families who might not even know these irreplaceable pieces had survived the war's devastation. A second envelope, this one marked urgent for authorities, contained what appeared to be detailed provenance documentation for each artwork, including names of original owners, dates of Nazi confiscation, and locations where pieces had been stolen. The meticulous record-keeping revealed Abraham Rothschild's careful preparation for eventual restitution, a plan interrupted by his untimely death and subsequently forgotten for 8 decades. Among the documentation, Elena found photographs showing some of the paintings in their original settings, hanging in elegant European homes, displayed in prestigious galleries, treasured in private collections that represented generations of family heritage. Each photograph was annotated with heart-wrenching details, stolen from Goldstein family, Berlin, November 1938, looted from Musée de l'Art Moderne, Paris, June 1940, confiscated from Villa Benedetti, Florence, September 1943. These weren't merely valuable objects, they were family memories, cultural identity, and artistic legacy stolen from people who had already lost everything else to Nazi persecution. Elena discovered additional materials in a waterproof container, correspondence between Abraham Rothschild and various European colleagues, detailed maps showing locations where other stolen artworks might be hidden, and even photographs of Nazi officers involved in the systematic art theft. The documentation painted a picture of an underground network of art dealers, museum curators, and private collectors who had risked their lives to preserve cultural treasures from Nazi destruction. One particularly chilling document was a list titled "Works Still Missing Priority Recovery," containing descriptions of hundreds of additional stolen pieces that remained unaccounted for. Elena realized she had stumbled upon not just a hidden collection, but evidence of one of history's most extensive cultural crimes, a systematic campaign to steal and destroy the artistic heritage of occupied Europe. As afternoon light faded outside the mansion, Elena remained in the hidden chamber, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her discovery and the impossible decisions it presented. The demolition work that was supposed to solve her immediate financial crisis had evolved into something infinitely more complex and morally challenging. She thought about Diego, currently staying with her mother, while undergoing his latest round of treatments. The experimental therapy that offered hope for his condition cost $18,000 per month, completely beyond their financial reach, without Elena's demolition income. But how could she proceed with destroying this mansion, knowing what lay hidden within its walls? Elena also considered the unknown families whose heritage surrounded her, descendants of Holocaust victims, who might still be alive, still searching for traces of their stolen legacy. Did she have the right to make decisions about artwork that belonged to others? But did she have the right to sacrifice her son's health for the sake of strangers she'd never meet? The legal implications were equally daunting. Discovering stolen Nazi artwork would involve federal authorities, international art recovery organizations, and potentially years of legal proceedings to establish rightful ownership. During that time, the collection would likely be seized as evidence, leaving Elena with nothing to show for her discovery, except legal fees and lost income. Yet the moral weight of the situation pressed heavily on her conscience. Abraham Rothschild had died protecting these masterpieces, intending their return to legitimate owners. Could she honor that sacrifice while also securing her family's financial future? Outside, the October rain continued its steady rhythm against the mansion's deteriorating windows. Inside the hidden chamber, surrounded by masterpieces that had waited 8 decades for liberation, Elena Vasquez faced a choice that would define not only her family's immediate future, but her understanding of what constituted the right action when powerful interests and desperate need collided. The evening shadows lengthened as Elena finally secured the chamber and prepared to return home to Maria and Diego. Tomorrow would bring impossible decisions about the discovery's implications. Tonight she would carry the weight of secrets that had cost lives to protect and might yet destroy others who sought to possess them. The demolition project that was meant to provide financial salvation had just become the most complicated moral dilemma of her life. And somewhere in the darkness of the hidden chamber, $110 million worth of stolen masterpieces waited for someone to decide their fate, and the fate of the families who had never stopped hoping for their return. Elena's hands trembled as she turned the key in her cottage door at 11:47 p.m., the weight of her discovery pressing down like a physical burden. The small craftsman home felt impossibly normal after spending hours surrounded by $110 million worth of stolen masterpieces. The familiar scent of Maria's lavender tea and Diego's art supplies scattered across the kitchen table created a jarring contrast to the hidden chamber's musty atmosphere and priceless secrets. "You're late," Maria called softly from the living room, where she sat grading medical charts by lamplight. Dr. Maria Santos Vasquez had the kind of steady presence that made her exceptional in emergency medicine, calm under pressure, analytically sharp, and intuitively compassionate. After 14 years of marriage, she could read Elena's moods with surgical precision. "The mansion was more complex than expected," Elena replied, hanging her tool belt on the kitchen hook, while carefully avoiding Maria's searching gaze. The photographs on her phone felt like evidence of a crime she hadn't committed, but had somehow become complicit in discovering. Maria appeared in the doorway, still wearing her hospital scrubs beneath an oversized cardigan. Her dark eyes, exhausted from a double shift in the ER, immediately detected something unusual in Elena's demeanor. "Complex how? You look like you've seen a ghost." Elena almost laughed at the accuracy of that assessment. The hidden chamber had felt haunted, not by supernatural presence, but by the lingering echoes of interrupted lives, stolen heritage, and justice deferred for 8 decades. Just a lot of unexpected architectural challenges. "Nothing I can't handle." The lie tasted bitter. Elena had never kept secrets from Maria, not in 14 years of partnership. They had built their relationship on absolute honesty, supporting each other through Elena's father's death, Maria's grueling medical residency, the joy of adopting Diego, and now the terror of his diagnosis. But this discovery transcended personal transparency. It involved federal crimes, international law, and potentially dangerous people who had spent decades keeping these secrets buried. "How's Diego?" Elena asked, deflecting attention from her own emotional state. "Tired but optimistic. The new medication seems to be reducing the tremors." Maria's expression softened with the mixture of hope and fear that had become constant companions since Diego's diagnosis. "He spent the evening working on that architectural drawing you started with him, designing his dream treehouse with flying buttresses and Gothic arches." Elena smiled genuinely for the first time all day. Diego had inherited her love of structural engineering and Maria's attention to detail, creating elaborate blueprints for impossible buildings that defied physics but captured unlimited imagination. His bedroom walls were covered with sketches of castles that could fly, bridges that curved through clouds, and houses that grew from trees like architectural flowers. "Did you tell him about the mansion?" Maria asked, settling onto the couch beside Elena. "I mentioned it briefly. He wants to see the original stonework before I start demolition." Elena's throat tightened at the thought of destroying the Rothschild estate without revealing its hidden treasures. The architectural heritage alone deserved preservation, but the collection behind that false wall represented something infinitely more significant. "Elena," Maria said gently, taking her wife's calloused hands in her own, "whatever happened today you can tell me. We face everything together. Remember?" The temptation to confess everything was overwhelming. Maria's medical training included psychological evaluation. She would understand the magnitude of the discovery, the legal implications, and the impossible choices involved. But Elena also knew that sharing this burden would make Maria an accessory to whatever decisions lay ahead. If federal authorities became involved, if powerful interests sought to suppress the discovery, Elena wanted to protect her family from potential consequences. I found some interesting architectural details that might increase the salvage value, Elena said carefully. I need to research historical records before making decisions about how to proceed. Maria studied her face with the clinical assessment that made her exceptional at diagnosing patients who couldn't articulate their symptoms. After a long moment, she nodded slowly. Okay, but promise me, if this involves anything dangerous or illegal, you'll tell me immediately. I promise, Elena replied, though she wondered if discovering stolen Nazi artwork automatically involved both danger and illegality, regardless of intent. They went to bed at midnight, but Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling while Maria slept peacefully beside her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Abraham Rothschild's handwritten letter, the detailed provenance documentation, and those heartbreaking annotations, stolen from Goldstein family, looted from Musée de l'Art Moderne, confiscated from Villa Benedetti. At 3:17 a.m., Elena gave up on sleep and moved to her laptop in the kitchen. If she was going to make informed decisions about the collection, she needed to understand the legal, historical and practical implications of her discovery. Her first search was Nazi stolen art recovery legal process, which yielded thousands of results. The complexity was immediately apparent. Recovering stolen artwork involved multiple international organizations, complicated legal frameworks, and often decades of litigation. The World Jewish Restitution Organization, the Commission for Looted Art in Europe, and various national governments maintained databases of missing cultural property, but establishing provenance and rightful ownership often required extensive documentation and expert authentication. Elena found case studies that illustrated both successful recoveries and lengthy legal battles. Some families had received stolen artwork back within months of discovery. Others had fought for decades against museums, private collectors, and institutions that claimed good faith purchase or statute of limitations protections. The financial and emotional costs of recovery could be devastating, even for families who ultimately won their cases. More troubling were articles about discoveries that had been suppressed or mysteriously disappeared. Elena read about art dealers who had died in apparent accidents after announcing major fines, families who had been intimidated into abandoning recovery efforts, and collections that had vanished from evidence storage. The international art market, according to these sources, included powerful interests willing to use extreme measures to protect profitable illicit operations. A 2019 FBI report estimated that stolen and looted artwork represented a $6 billion annual black market, ranking art crime as the fourth largest illegal trade after drugs, weapons and human trafficking. Many stolen pieces circulated for decades through legitimate auction houses and galleries, their criminal origins hidden by falsified documentation and deliberate ignorance from buyers who preferred profitable acquisitions to ethical scrutiny. Elena discovered that Connecticut law required reporting archaeological and historical finds on private property, but the regulations were ambiguous about artwork discovered during demolition. Federal law definitely required reporting stolen cultural property, but the process could take years and offered no compensation for discoverers who chose to follow legal protocols. By 5:30 a.m., Elena had filled a notebook with information that only deepened her dilemma. Reporting the collection would certainly result in its confiscation pending investigation. The legal process could take years, during which Elena would receive no financial benefit, while facing mounting medical bills and potential foreclosure. Even if rightful owners were eventually located, Elena might receive no compensation. Many recovery laws provided no finder's fees, instead treating discovery as a civic duty. But keeping the collection secret felt morally indefensible. Elena imagined elderly Holocaust survivors who might still be alive, still hoping to recover family heirlooms stolen 80 years ago. She thought about their children and grandchildren, who might never know their heritage had survived, unless someone chose to do the right thing regardless of personal cost. Maria found Elena at the kitchen table, surrounded by printed articles and handwritten notes, when she came downstairs at 6:45 a.m. to prepare for her morning shift. "Research for the mansion project?" Maria asked, pouring coffee and scanning the papers scattered across the table. "Historical background," Elena replied vaguely. "The original owner was an art dealer who immigrated from Europe in 1939. I want to understand the family's story before I start demolition." Maria picked up an article about Nazi art theft and raised an eyebrow. "Thorough research. Most demolition contractors wouldn't bother learning about previous owners. Most demolition contractors don't usually work on estates with this much architectural significance." Elena deflected. "The craftsmanship deserves respect, even if the building can't be saved." After Maria left for the hospital, Elena made two crucial phone calls. The first was to Dr. Rebecca Chen, an art history professor at Yale University, whom Elena had met during a restoration project at the university's art gallery. If anyone could provide expert guidance about authentication and recovery processes, Dr. Chen's expertise in European art history would be invaluable. "Elena, what a pleasant surprise." Dr. Chen's voice carried genuine warmth. "How is the restoration business treating you?" "Actually, I'm calling about a hypothetical situation," Elena began carefully. "If someone discovered what appeared to be significant European artwork from the 1930s and 1940s, what would be the proper protocol for authentication and ownership verification?" The pause on the other end stretched long enough that Elena wondered if the call had dropped. When Dr. Chen spoke again, her tone had shifted to professional caution. "That's a very specific hypothetical question, Elena. Are we discussing a theoretical scenario for educational purposes, or has someone actually made such a discovery?" Elena had anticipated this question but still struggled with the answer. Dr. Chen's expertise could be crucial, but involving her might create legal complications if the situation escalated beyond Elena's control. "Let's say purely hypothetical for now," Elena replied. "I'm trying to understand the legal and ethical framework before advising a client about potential findings." Dr. Chen's explanation was both illuminating and discouraging. Authentication of significant artwork required multiple levels of expertise: technical analysis of paint composition and canvas dating, historical research into provenance documentation, and comparison with known works by the attributed artists. The process could cost tens of thousands of dollars and take months to complete, with no guarantee of definitive conclusions. If the artwork was potentially stolen, the legal requirements became even more complex. Federal law required immediate reporting to the FBI's art crime team, which would seize the pieces pending investigation. International law enforcement organizations would become involved if the theft occurred in other countries. The discoverer would have no control over the process and no guarantee of compensation, regardless of the artwork's eventual value or the success of restitution efforts. Hypothetically speaking, Dr. Chen concluded, someone making such a discovery would face a choice between significant legal obligations and potentially life-changing ethical responsibilities. The right course of action might not be the profitable one. Elena's second call was to Thomas Bradley, a lawyer who specialized in property rights and had helped Elena navigate complex restoration contracts. She needed legal advice about her obligations as a demolition contractor and property rights regarding discoveries made during work.
Interesting question. Thomas mused after Elena described her hypothetical scenario. Connecticut law is fairly clear about archaeological finds. You're required to report anything of historical significance to the state archaeologist. But artwork discovered in private buildings falls into a grayer area. Thomas explained that Elena's demolition contract gave her rights to salvage materials for resale, but those rights didn't extend to valuable artwork or historical artifacts that might belong to previous owners or their estates. If the artwork was stolen property, possession could constitute a federal crime, regardless of how it was discovered. My advice for your hypothetical discoverer, Thomas concluded, would be to contact authorities immediately and maintain detailed documentation of everything. Attempting to conceal or profit from such a discovery could result in criminal charges, even if the intent wasn't malicious. After the phone calls, Elena sat in her workshop surrounded by half-finished furniture projects and Diego's architectural drawings. Every piece of advice pointed toward the same conclusion. She had legal and ethical obligations to report the collection immediately, but following that path would destroy her family's financial stability at the exact moment when Diego's health depended on continued treatment. Elena thought about Abraham Rothschild's letter and his intention to return the stolen artwork to rightful owners. He had risked his life to preserve these cultural treasures, dying before he could complete his mission. Didn't Elena have a responsibility to honor his sacrifice, regardless of personal cost? But she also thought about Diego's trembling hands, the new medication that offered hope for controlling his neurological condition, and the experimental treatments that could prevent permanent disability. Didn't she have an even greater responsibility to protect her son's future? At 2:30 p.m., Elena returned to the Rothschild mansion with a new perspective and a plan. She would continue documenting the collection while researching the specific pieces and their original owners. If she could identify families who were still actively searching for their stolen heritage, she might find a way to facilitate recovery while ensuring her family's financial security. The hidden chamber felt different in daylight streaming through the mansion's upper windows. Elena had brought professional photography equipment and a portable generator to power proper lighting. Each painting deserved thorough documentation, not just for authentication purposes, but as evidence of their survival for families who might have given up hope decades ago. She began with the Leonardo workshop piece,
photographing every detail of the painting's surface, frame and identification placard. The brushwork was extraordinary even to her untrained eye, subtle gradations of color and light that seemed to make the Renaissance woman's face come alive with personality and intelligence. Elena researched each artwork using her phone's internet connection, cross-referencing the pieces with databases of stolen art maintained by various international organizations. The results were sobering. Nearly every piece in the collection appeared on missing art lists maintained by Holocaust restitution organizations. The Van Gogh landscape was listed as stolen from the Rosenberg family collection in Paris in June 1940. The database entry included a heartbreaking note: family seeking recovery for 4 generations. Last known survivor, Sarah Rosenberg Klein, age 94, residing in Montreal, Canada. Contact information available to verified recovery organizations. Elena stared at that entry for a long time. Sarah Rosenberg Klein was still alive, still hoping to recover her family's stolen heritage. The painting hanging in this hidden chamber might represent her last connection to relatives murdered in the Holocaust, her only remaining link to a world that had been destroyed when she was 14 years old. Similar stories emerged for other pieces in the collection. The Picasso sketch was stolen from the Goldstein family in Berlin. Descendants in New York had been searching for it since 1987. The Matisse still life had belonged to a Jewish art dealer in Amsterdam, whose great-nephew maintained an active recovery case with the Dutch government. Each database entry represented real people with ongoing grief, families who had never stopped believing their heritage might someday be recovered. Elena realized she wasn't just looking at valuable artwork, she was seeing family photographs, heirloom jewelry and treasured possessions that connected living people to ancestors they had never known. As afternoon faded into evening, Elena made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She would find a way to return the artwork to rightful owners while protecting her family's financial future. The solution might be complex and risky, but it honored both Abraham Rothschild's intentions and her responsibilities as a mother. Elena photographed Abraham Rothschild's complete documentation, including his correspondence with other art dealers and his detailed maps showing additional hiding places. The materials suggested an extensive network of people who had risked everything to preserve cultural treasures from Nazi destruction. Some of those treasures might still be hidden, waiting for someone with the courage to continue Rothschild's interrupted mission. Before leaving the mansion, Elena made one more discovery that changed her understanding of the situation entirely. Behind the collection's main display, she found a modern addition that clearly hadn't been installed by Abraham Rothschild, a sophisticated alarm system connected to external communication equipment. Someone had been monitoring this chamber, maintaining its security, and possibly tracking anyone who discovered its contents. The realization sent ice through Elena's veins. She wasn't the first person to find this collection. Someone else knew about it, had been protecting it, and might already be aware of her discovery. The decision about reporting the artwork might not be hers to make. Powerful interests might already be moving to reclaim or suppress the collection. Elena gathered her equipment quickly and sealed the chamber opening with temporary materials that would disguise her access point. If someone was monitoring the collection, she needed time to understand who they were and what their intentions might be. The demolition project that had begun as a simple financial solution was evolving into something far more dangerous than she had imagined. Driving home through Connecticut's autumn darkness, Elena realized that her discovery had attracted attention from forces she didn't understand. The collection's value made it a target for criminal organizations, unethical dealers, and potentially violent people who had spent decades keeping these secrets buried. Tomorrow she would need to make contact with the families whose heritage lay hidden in that chamber. But tonight she would prepare for the possibility that powerful enemies were already closing in, ready to protect their profitable silence at any cost. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message as she pulled into her driveway. "We know what you found. Meeting tomorrow 10 a.m., Riverside Cafe downtown. Come alone or the collection disappears forever." The number was blocked, the message untraceable. Elena stared at the screen, realizing that her attempt to help Holocaust survivors recover their stolen heritage had just placed her family in the crosshairs of people who had been willing to kill to protect these secrets for 8 decades. The battle for justice was about to begin, and Elena Vasquez had just discovered she was already fighting for her life. Before we continue this incredible journey tomorrow, tell us in the comments what you think Elena should do next. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because part 3 will reveal who's been watching the collection and what they're willing to do to keep it hidden. Elena barely slept that night, the anonymous text message replaying in her mind like a broken record. "We know what you found. Meeting tomorrow 10 a.m., Riverside Cafe downtown. Come alone, or the collection disappears forever." Every shadow outside her bedroom window seemed threatening, every sound in the house potentially dangerous. At 5:30 a.m., she gave up on sleep and moved to the kitchen, where she sat with her laptop and a growing sense of dread. Maria found her there 2 hours later, surrounded by printed articles about art theft, international crime syndicates, and unsolved cases of people who had disappeared after discovering valuable artwork. The expression on Elena's face must have been alarming because Maria immediately sat down beside her without even pouring coffee first. "Okay," Maria said firmly, taking Elena's hands in her own. "No more deflection, no more vague explanations about architectural challenges. You look terrified, and I need to know why." Elena met her wife's eyes and made a decision that felt both necessary and potentially catastrophic. "What I'm about to tell you could put our family in danger. Are you sure you want to know?" Maria's medical training kicked in, the same calm, analytical demeanor she used when treating trauma patients in the emergency room. "I'm sure. Tell me everything." For the next 30 minutes, Elena described her discovery in exhaustive detail: the hidden chamber, the Nazi-looted artwork, Abraham Rothschild's documentation, the surveillance equipment, and the threatening message. She showed Maria the photographs on her phone, the historical research she'd compiled, and the database entries for families still searching for their stolen heritage. Maria listened without interruption, her expression shifting from concern to amazement to something approaching horror as the implications became clear. When Elena finished, they sat in silence for several minutes while Maria processed the magnitude of the situation. "Jesus Christ," Elena Maria finally whispered. "You've stumbled into something that could get us all killed. I know, but I also can't ignore it. These families, some of them are still alive, still hoping to recover pieces of their heritage that were stolen during the Holocaust. How can I walk away from that?" Maria stood and began pacing,
her mind working through the medical professional's approach to crisis management. First priority is family safety. Diego cannot be exposed to whatever danger this represents. Second priority is legal protection. We need expert advice before you meet with whoever sent that message. Third priority is finding a way to do the right thing without getting ourselves murdered in the process. Elena felt a wave of relief at having finally shared the burden with her partner. Maria's analytical approach was exactly what the situation required, not emotional paralysis, but strategic thinking about how to navigate an impossibly complex scenario. I've already thought about legal counsel, Elena said. Thomas Bradley gave me some general advice yesterday, but this is beyond his expertise. We need someone who specializes in international art recovery and federal criminal law.
And we need to get Diego somewhere safe before you have that meeting, Maria added. My mother's house in Vermont. I'll call in sick today and drive him there this morning. You don't meet with these people until our son is hundreds of miles away from whatever this becomes. Elena nodded gratefully. She had been so focused on the moral implications of the discovery that she hadn't adequately considered the immediate physical danger to her family. If international crime syndicates were involved in protecting stolen Nazi artwork, they wouldn't hesitate to threaten a 10-year-old boy to ensure Elena's cooperation. While Maria made arrangements for Diego's departure, Elena contacted Dr. Sarah Hoffman, a specialist in Holocaust restitution law, recommended by Dr. Chen. The conversation was brief but illuminating. Dr. Hoffman agreed to an emergency consultation at 8:30 a.m., giving Elena just enough time to seek expert advice before the mysterious meeting. Diego took the news of his unexpected trip to Vermont with the resilient acceptance that had characterized his response to his medical diagnosis. At 9 years old, he had already learned that adult decisions sometimes required him to be flexible without full explanations. "Is this about the mansion project?" he asked, while packing his sketchbook and colored pencils. "Yes," Elena replied honestly. "I discovered some things that need careful handling, and I want you somewhere safe while I figure out the best way to proceed. Like when you found that Civil War cannon in the Johnson house basement." Elena smiled despite her anxiety. 2 years ago, she had discovered a Revolutionary War cannon while renovating a colonial home. The find had required historical society involvement and created a media sensation that delayed the project for months. Something like that, but more complicated. "Can I see the discovery when you're done figuring it out?" "I hope so," Elena said, hugging him tightly. "I really hope so." After Maria and Diego departed for Vermont, Elena drove to Dr. Hoffman's Hartford office with a sense of approaching a point of no return. Whatever advice she received, whatever decisions she made in the next few hours, would determine not just her family's future, but potentially the fate of artwork that represented the cultural heritage of Holocaust victims. Dr. Hoffman's office occupied the top floor of a converted brownstone, its walls lined with books about international law, historical documentation, and framed certificates from various restitution organizations. Dr. Hoffman herself was a woman in her early 60s with graying hair, and the intense focus of someone who had spent decades fighting for justice in cases where evidence was fragmentary and opponents were powerful. "You've discovered something significant, Dr. Hoffman said after reviewing Elena's photographs and documentation. This collection represents exactly the type of Nazi-looted artwork that families have been searching for since 1945. The documentation appears authentic, and the provenance research in Abraham Rothschild's files would be invaluable for establishing rightful ownership. But, Elena prompted, sensing hesitation in the lawyer's tone, but the circumstances of your discovery create enormous complications. You're not dealing with a simple legal matter. You're potentially confronting an organized conspiracy that has protected this collection for 8 decades. The surveillance equipment you found suggests ongoing criminal activity. The threatening message indicates that violent people are involved. Dr. Hoffman explained that Elena was legally required to report the discovery to federal authorities immediately. Attempting to negotiate independently with whoever had sent the threatening message could constitute obstruction of justice and potentially make Elena an accessory to federal crimes. However, Dr. Hoffman continued, I understand your family's financial situation and your concerns about the legal process. Holocaust restitution cases can take years to resolve, during which you would receive no compensation and face significant legal expenses. The people threatening you know this. They're counting on your financial desperation to force cooperation. Elena felt the walls closing in from all directions. Legal obligation pointed toward immediate federal reporting, but that path would destroy her family's financial stability. The threatening message suggested that cooperation might provide compensation, but dealing with criminals would expose her family to ongoing danger and make her complicit in continuing the theft of Holocaust victims' heritage. Is there any precedent for situations like this? Elena asked. Dr. Hoffman pulled a thick file from her cabinet. Several cases over the past 20 years. Some discoverers chose to work with criminals and were later prosecuted when the schemes were exposed. Others reported discoveries immediately and received no compensation despite providing crucial evidence for successful recoveries. A few tried to negotiate independently and simply disappeared. The lawyer leaned forward, her expression serious. Elena, I'm going to give you advice that goes beyond legal requirements. These people who contacted you, they've been protecting a $110 million collection for decades. They've invested enormous resources in maintaining secrecy, and they won't allow a demolition contractor to threaten their operation. If you meet with them without federal protection, you're risking your life. But if I report the discovery now, my son doesn't get his medical treatments, and we lose our house. Yes, Dr. Hoffman said bluntly. Those are the stakes. Justice for Holocaust victims versus your family's immediate survival. I've seen families destroyed by both choices. Elena left the consultation with more questions than answers, and less than an hour to decide whether to attend the meeting at Riverside Cafe. Dr. Hoffman had offered to contact federal authorities immediately, but Elena needed time to consider all implications before making an irreversible decision. The Riverside Cafe occupied a restored Victorian building in downtown Hartford's Arts District, its outdoor seating area overlooking the Connecticut River. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table with clear sightlines to all entrances and exits. Her phone contained Dr. Hoffman's direct number on speed dial, and she had left detailed notes about the situation with Maria, in case something went wrong. At exactly 10 a.m., a woman approached Elena's table. She appeared to be in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored business suit, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. Everything about her suggested wealth, education, and authority. She could have been a bank president, museum director, or corporate executive. Miss Vasquez, the woman said, extending a manicured hand. I'm Victoria Westbrook. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Elena shook hands cautiously, noting the woman's firm grip and direct eye contact. You're the one who sent the text message. I represent interested parties who have been monitoring the Rothschild estate for many years. Your discovery of the collection has created a situation that requires immediate resolution. Victoria signaled a waiter and ordered coffee for both of them, displaying the confident assumption that she controlled this conversation. Elena studied her carefully, looking for signs of the criminal menace suggested by the threatening message. Instead, Victoria projected the polished professionalism of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. Let me be direct, Victoria continued. The collection you discovered is extremely valuable, but its legal status is complicated by decades of institutional protection. Reporting your find to authorities would trigger a legal process that could take years to resolve, during which time you would receive no compensation despite your discovery enabling successful recoveries. And your alternative? Elena asked. Victoria removed a leather portfolio from her briefcase. We're prepared to offer you $2 million in cash for your silence about the collection and your cooperation in transferring the artwork to appropriate parties who will ensure its proper disposition. Elena's coffee cup trembled as she set it down. $2 million would solve every financial problem her family faced: Diego's medical treatments, the mortgage, and financial security for years to come. But the phrasing of Victoria's offer raised immediate red flags. What do you mean by appropriate parties and proper disposition? The collection will be handled by experienced professionals who understand the complexities of Holocaust restitution. Families will eventually receive their heritage, but through channels that protect all parties from unnecessary legal complications. Elena leaned back, studying Victoria's carefully neutral expression. You're asking me to help you steal Holocaust victims' artwork while promising that somehow, eventually, maybe, some families might get some of their heritage back through unofficial channels that conveniently avoid federal oversight. Victoria's composure slipped slightly. Miss Vasquez, you're oversimplifying a complex situation. The legal system for art recovery is broken. It favors institutions over families, lawyers over victims, and bureaucracy over justice. We represent a more efficient alternative. Efficient for whom? For everyone involved. You receive immediate compensation, families eventually receive their heritage, and the artwork avoids becoming trapped in federal evidence storage for decades. Elena considered the offer while watching boats navigate the Connecticut River below. $2 million would transform her family's life, but accepting it would make her complicit in continuing the theft that had devastated families for 8 decades. She thought about Sarah Rosenberg Klein, the 94-year-old woman still searching for her family's stolen Van Gogh, and wondered if Victoria's efficient alternative would ever actually reach legitimate families. I need to understand who you really represent, Elena said. Are you connected to the original theft in the 1940s? Are you part of an organization that's been trafficking stolen artwork for decades? Victoria's professional mask returned, but Elena detected calculation behind her composed expression. I represent a consortium of collectors, dealers, and institutions who have been working to resolve complex ownership issues for many years. Our methods may be unconventional, but our goal is ultimately the same as the federal authorities: returning artwork to rightful owners. Through private sales and secret negotiations that happen to generate enormous profits for your consortium.
through practical solutions that achieve results instead of creating decades of litigation that enrich lawyers while families die waiting for justice.
Elena stood in the Hartford Federal Building's conference room, watching through bulletproof glass as Sarah Rosenberg Klein held her family's Van Gogh painting for the first time in 83 years. At 94, Sarah's hands trembled not from age, but from overwhelming emotion as she traced the brushstrokes her grandfather had shown her as a child in their Paris apartment, before the Nazis came, before her world disappeared forever. He used to tell me that Van Gogh painted with sunshine, Sarah whispered to her granddaughter Rebecca, who had flown from Montreal the day after Agent Morrison's call. I never understood what he meant until now. Even after all these years, it still glows. Elena felt tears she'd been holding back for months. The federal investigation had moved faster than anyone expected, partly because Victoria Westbrook's criminal consortium had made a critical mistake. They'd attempted to relocate the collection the night Elena contacted the FBI, triggering a coordinated international operation that exposed trafficking networks across 3 continents. Agent Morrison approached Elena with a folder containing updates she'd been waiting for since Christmas. The final authentication results came back this morning. 26 pieces from the Rothschild collection have been positively identified and matched with families. The total recovered value is $178 million. Elena had learned to measure success differently over the past 3 months. The numbers mattered. Each million represented resources that could be returned to families, compensation that could address decades of loss. But the real victories were moments like this: Sarah Rosenberg Klein reunited with her heritage, the Goldstein family in New York receiving their great-grandfather's Picasso sketch, the Amsterdam Museum recovering their stolen Matisse that had been missing since 1943. What about the criminal prosecutions? Elena asked. Victoria Westbrook and 12 associates were indicted last week on federal charges, including conspiracy, art trafficking, and racketeering. The evidence from the Rothschild collection linked them to stolen artwork in storage facilities across 7 states. We estimate their organization trafficked over $2 billion worth of stolen art since 1952. Agent Morrison handed Elena a check that represented her compensation as a federal witness and discoverer. The amount, $450,000, wasn't the $2 million Victoria had offered, but it was enough to cover Diego's medical treatments for the next 2 years and prevent foreclosure on their house. More importantly, it came with the knowledge that Elena had chosen correctly when faced with an impossible decision. There's something else, Agent Morrison continued. The State Department received a request from the German government. They want to formally recognize your contribution to Holocaust restitution efforts. The ceremony would be in Berlin next month. Elena considered the invitation while watching Sarah Rosenberg Klein say goodbye to her family's painting. It would be placed in the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts under a special agreement, allowing Sarah to visit whenever she wished, ensuring the painting would be preserved for future generations while remaining accessible to its rightful family. I appreciate the recognition, Elena said finally, but I think I'd rather spend that time at home with Diego. He's responding well to the new treatment protocol, and I don't want to miss any of his progress. Agent Morrison smiled. The German government anticipated that response. They're sending a representative to Connecticut instead. Apparently they've learned that sometimes the most important ceremonies happen in places that matter to the people being honored. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Diego's appointment went great. Dr. Patterson says the tremors have decreased by 70% since starting the new medication. We're celebrating with ice cream. Love you. The relief Elena felt reading that message reminded her why she'd made the choices that led to this moment. Diego's health had been her primary concern throughout the entire ordeal, and the federal compensation had ensured his access to experimental treatments that were showing remarkable results. As the formal ceremony concluded, and families began departing with their recovered artwork, Elena reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a demolition contract and evolved into something that would affect generations of Holocaust survivors and their descendants. Agent Morrison walked Elena to the building's main entrance, where federal security would escort her home for the final time. The protective surveillance would end today, now that Victoria Westbrook's organization had been dismantled and its leadership imprisoned. Any regrets? Agent Morrison asked as they reached Elena's car. Elena considered the question while looking back at the federal building, where $178 million worth of recovered artwork was being processed for return to rightful owners. I regret that it took 80 years for these families to get their heritage back. I regret that criminal organizations profited from Holocaust victims' suffering for decades. But my decision to contact you instead of taking Victoria's money, no regrets at all. The Rothschild estate has been purchased by the state of Connecticut, Agent Morrison mentioned. They're converting it into a Holocaust education center with a special exhibit about art recovery. Your discovery is going to help educate thousands of students about cultural preservation and the importance of returning stolen heritage. Elena thought about Abraham Rothschild's letter, expressing hope that justice would eventually prevail and treasures would find their way home to rightful owners. His faith had been vindicated after 8 decades, not through the legal system he trusted, but through the courage of a desperate mother who chose principle over profit when faced with impossible circumstances. 2 years later, Elena pulled into the driveway of her restored craftsman cottage, noting the new workshop addition she'd built with funds from art recovery consulting work. The FBI had hired her as a specialist in architectural investigation, helping locate hidden rooms and concealed artwork in properties connected to historical crimes. It wasn't the career she'd planned, but it provided steady income while allowing her to continue the work Abraham Rothschild had started. Diego ran from the house to greet her, his movement steady and strong. The neurological condition that had once threatened his future was now controlled by medications made affordable through Elena's federal compensation. At 12, he was designing increasingly sophisticated architectural projects, including a proposal for a Holocaust memorial garden at his middle school. "Mom, you got another letter from Germany," Diego announced, holding an official envelope with diplomatic markings. Inside was an invitation to speak at the Berlin Conference on Art Restitution, where Elena would address an international audience about the role of accidental discovery in recovering stolen cultural property. The invitation included travel arrangements for Elena's entire family, and a request for Diego to participate in the youth panel about cultural preservation. "What do you think?" Elena asked Diego, who was studying the conference agenda with obvious interest. "I think Abraham Rothschild would want us to go," Diego replied. "He tried to help families get their artwork back, and now you're doing the same thing. It's like continuing his work."
Elena found Maria in the kitchen, reviewing case files from her new position as Director of Emergency Medicine at Hartford Hospital. The promotion had come with a significant salary increase, but more importantly, it allowed Maria to implement trauma care protocols that helped other families facing medical crises similar to Diego's condition. "How was the consultation in Springfield?" Maria asked, referring to Elena's investigation of a 1920s mansion where previous owners might have hidden artwork during World War II. "No hidden chambers this time, but I found some interesting architectural modifications that suggest the original owners were preparing hiding places. We'll know more after the historical research is complete." Elena had learned that most investigations didn't yield dramatic discoveries like the Rothschild collection, but each property told a story about families who had tried to protect valuable possessions during dangerous times, and occasionally those efforts led to successful recoveries that reunited families with lost heritage. "The Berlin invitation arrived today," Elena mentioned, showing Maria the conference materials. Maria reviewed the agenda and smiled. "A month in Germany during Diego's summer break with opportunities to meet families whose artwork you helped recover. I think we should accept." That evening, the three of them sat in Elena's workshop while she demonstrated wood joinery techniques for a cabinet project Diego was designing. The conversation naturally turned to the upcoming conference and the larger questions about justice, sacrifice and moral courage that had shaped their family's experience. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken the money from those criminals?" Diego asked. Elena considered the question while guiding Diego's hands as he cut precise joints in the maple wood. "Sometimes, we would have been financially secure immediately, but we also would have been complicit in continuing the theft of family's heritage. I think the person I would have become by making that choice wouldn't have been someone I could respect, and those families would never have gotten their artwork back," Diego added. "Exactly. Sarah Rosenberg Klein died 6 months after being reunited with her family's Van Gogh. If I had accepted Victoria's offer, she would have died without ever seeing that painting again." Maria joined the conversation from her spot at Elena's drafting table, where she was reviewing architectural plans for a new children's hospital wing. "The hardest part wasn't the financial risk, or even the physical danger from those criminals. It was not knowing whether we were making the right choice when Diego's health was at stake." Elena nodded, "But I realized that the person Diego needed as a mother was someone who chose justice over personal gain, even when the cost was enormous. I wanted him to learn that some principles matter more than money. Plus," Diego added with 12-year-old pragmatism, "the FBI compensation worked out fine, and now you have a job helping families recover stolen artwork. It's like everything worked out the way it was supposed to."
Elena smiled at her son's optimistic assessment, though she knew the outcome could easily have been different if Victoria Westbrook's organization had been more violent or if federal authorities had been less cooperative. The path from desperate mother to art recovery specialist had required luck as much as courage. As they finished their work and prepared for dinner, Elena reflected on the unexpected ways that moral choices could reshape entire lives. The demolition job she'd taken to pay medical bills had become the foundation for a career dedicated to returning stolen heritage to rightful owners. The financial crisis that had driven her to consider criminal cooperation had ultimately led to resources that exceeded anything Victoria Westbrook had offered. But most importantly, Elena had discovered that the courage to choose principle over profit, even in desperate circumstances, could create possibilities that seemed impossible when fear and financial pressure dominated decision-making. The Rothschild collection had been her family's salvation, not because it provided wealth, but because it offered an opportunity to demonstrate that justice was worth fighting for regardless of personal cost. Abraham Rothschild's interrupted mission had finally been completed, not by the legal system he'd trusted, but by an ordinary person who chose to honor his sacrifice when continuation required enormous courage. As Elena tucked Diego into bed that night, he asked one final question about their upcoming trip to Berlin. "Do you think we'll meet families whose artwork you helped recover?" "I hope so," Elena replied. "I think Abraham Rothschild would have wanted us to see the faces of the people whose heritage he died protecting." Elena turned off Diego's light and walked to her bedroom window, looking out at the neighborhood where their family had almost lost everything 2 years ago. The craftsman cottage that had nearly been foreclosed was now fully restored, surrounded by gardens that Maria had planted, and a workshop where Elena taught Diego the carpentry skills that connected him to generations of craftspeople. The demolition contract that was supposed to solve a financial crisis had instead revealed a moral crisis that tested everything Elena believed about justice, family, and courage. Her choice to contact federal authorities instead of accepting criminal money had transformed her from a desperate mother into an advocate for Holocaust restitution, from a struggling contractor into a specialist in art recovery. Tomorrow would bring new investigations, new families searching for stolen heritage, and new opportunities to continue the work that Abraham Rothschild had started in 1943. Elena had learned that justice delayed wasn't necessarily justice denied. Sometimes it just required ordinary people to make extraordinary choices when presented with opportunities to do what was right, instead of what was profitable. The hidden chamber in the Rothschild mansion had been empty for 2 years, its contents returned to families or preserved in museums, where they would educate future generations about cultural preservation and the importance of moral courage. But Elena knew that Abraham Rothschild's real legacy wasn't the artwork he'd protected, it was the example he'd set about choosing justice over personal safety, principles over profit, and hope over despair, even when the cost seemed unbearable. As Elena prepared for sleep, she felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing she had honored that example when tested by circumstances that could have destroyed her family's future. The desperate mother who had swung a sledgehammer into a wall had discovered something far more valuable than stolen artwork. She had found the courage to become the person her son needed her to be, regardless of the price. The Berlin Conference on Art Restitution concluded with Elena's keynote address to an audience of Holocaust survivors, art recovery specialists, and government officials from 12 countries. Diego's participation in the youth panel had been equally successful, inspiring international cooperation on educational programs that would teach future generations about cultural preservation. But the most meaningful moment occurred during a private meeting with families whose artwork Elena's discovery had helped recover. Sarah Rosenberg Klein's granddaughter Rebecca presented Elena with a photograph of Sarah holding her family's Van Gogh during their final visit together, along with a letter Sarah had written but never sent. "Dear Elena, I never expected to see my grandfather's painting again. Your courage gave me something I thought was lost forever, not just the artwork, but the connection to family I barely remembered. Thank you for choosing justice over profit. Thank you for honoring my grandfather's memory. Thank you for proving that good people still exist in a world that sometimes feels broken. Sarah Rosenberg Klein, 1929 to 2023 inches. Elena kept that letter in her workshop, next to Abraham Rothschild's original correspondence about returning stolen artwork to rightful owners. Both documents reminded her that individual choices about justice and courage could echo across generations, creating possibilities for healing that seemed impossible when fear and desperation dominated decision-making. The desperate mother's discovery in a hidden chamber had become a catalyst for international cooperation on art recovery, educational programs about Holocaust history, and hope for families who had never stopped searching for their stolen heritage. And in a craftsman cottage in Connecticut, a 12-year-old boy learned carpentry skills while designing memorial gardens, growing up with the knowledge that his mother had chosen principle over profit when their family's survival was at stake. The sledgehammer that broke through Abraham Rothschild's hidden wall had revealed more than $178 million worth of stolen artwork. It had uncovered the enduring power of moral courage to transform ordinary people into agents of justice, regardless of the personal cost involved.